The sting of humiliation is a cold, sharp thing. For Audrey Shelton, it felt like 1,000 tiny needles piercing her skin under the glittering chandeliers of the Grand Astoria ballroom. Her ex-husband Brendan stood just feet away, his arm wrapped possessively around his new younger wife, a woman who looked like she'd been sculpted from glass and gold. He was laughing that booming laugh she once thought was full of life, but now recognized as hollow and cruel. His eyes met hers and a smirk played on his lips. He was flaunting his victory. He had the money, the status, and the trophy wife. What did she have? An off-the-rack dress and a past he had systematically erased. She was a ghost at their feast, a forgotten chapter in the story he was so proudly writing. But in the shadows of that opulent ballroom, another story was about to begin, and a single unexpected gesture would soon bring every single person in that room to their feet. The invitation was an elegant blade of ivory cardstock, its embossed gold lettering glinting mockingly from her worn wooden coffee table. The annual Foundation for Architectural Excellence Gala. For a moment, Audrey thought it was a cruel joke. This was Brendan's world. He was a partner at a high-powered development firm, a man who built gleaming, soulless towers of steel and glass that won awards for their audacity, not their heart. Her world, by contrast, had shrunk to the four walls of her modest apartment, a space filled with dusty textbooks on organic architecture and blueprints for projects that would never be built. She had been an architect once, or at least she had been on the path to becoming one. In college, her professors had called her a prodigy. Her designs weren't just buildings, they were living, breathing spaces that integrated with their environment. She dreamt of creating structures that felt like they had grown from the earth itself. Then she met Brendan. He was charming, ambitious, and utterly captivating. He loved her passion, or so she thought. He called her his little visionary. After they married, the slow erosion began. "This is a tough field, Audrey," he'd say, draping an arm around her as she hunched over her drafting table late at night. "It's a boys' club. Why don't you focus on making our house a home? You have such a talent for it." When his career took off, her dreams became a secondary concern. "We need to entertain my clients," he'd insist. "I need you by my side looking beautiful. That's more important than some design competition right now." He'd called her architectural ambitions a cute hobby, a phrase that felt like a pat on the head to a child. She remembered the Ethelgard Prize for Visionary Design. It was the one time she had defied him. The competition was for a public library, a space for the community. She had poured her soul into it, working in secret while he slept. Her design was revolutionary. A building that harvested rainwater, used geothermal heating, and featured a living roof that changed with the seasons. It was a testament to everything she believed in. She submitted it under a pseudonym, A.V. Sterling, using her middle name Victoria and her mother's maiden name. Brendan found out. The fight had been epic. "You're embarrassing me," he'd shouted. "My wife entering a competition like some desperate student. What will my partners think?" A month later, when the results were announced online, he'd scanned the list of winners with a triumphant sneer. "See nothing. I told you it was a waste of time. Now can we please focus on what's important? My career." She had been so crushed that she never checked the results herself. She simply took his word for it and packed her blueprints away, locking a part of herself in that dusty portfolio. 2 years after that, he'd left her for Tiffany, a 24-year-old Instagram model whose only architectural interest was finding the best angle for a selfie in a luxury penthouse. The divorce was brutal. He claimed she'd contributed nothing to his success, and the judge, swayed by his high-powered lawyers, agreed. She walked away with next to nothing. Now this invitation. She picked it up, ready to tear it in half. Why would she go to watch Brendan be celebrated, to endure the pitying glances of their former friends? Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend Jenna, a landscape architect who had never liked Brendan. "Did you get it?" Jenna asked, her voice bright. "The invitation to my public execution." "Yes, it just arrived," Audrey said dryly. "You're going?" It wasn't a question. "I am absolutely not. I'd rather have a root canal." Listen to me, Jenna said, her tone shifting from cheerful to serious. You've been hiding for a year. You've been letting him live rent-free in your head. You are the most talented person I know, Audrey. You are not his starter wife or his failed artist or whatever other garbage he spun about you. You are Audrey Shelton, and you are going to that gala. You're going to hold your head high, have a glass of free champagne, and show him that his departure was not an ending, but a long overdue beginning. Audrey was silent, twisting the corner of the card in her fingers. The thought terrified her. I don't have anything to wear, she whispered, the excuse sounding feeble even to her own ears. You're in luck, Jenna shot back. I have a friend who works at a high-end rental boutique. She owes me a favor. We're going to find you a dress that will make that plastic trophy of his melt. Despite every instinct screaming at her to stay home, a tiny defiant spark ignited in Audrey's chest. Maybe Jenna was right. Why was she still hiding? She hadn't done anything wrong. She had loved a man who turned out to be a monster. It wasn't a crime. It was a tragedy. Going to that gala wouldn't be for him. It would be for her. A single night to reclaim her own narrative. Okay, she said, her voice barely audible. Okay, I'll go. Getting ready felt like preparing for battle. Jenna was a force of nature, pulling Audrey through the rental boutique with a determined glint in her eye. She dismissed dress after dress, too safe, too apologetic, too ex-wife. Finally, she pulled out a gown of deep emerald green silk. It was simple, elegant, and timeless. It had a classic cut that draped beautifully with a modest neckline and a slit that only showed when Audrey walked. This is the one, Jenna declared. It doesn't scream for attention. It commands it. When Audrey put it on, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. For the past year, she had seen herself in shades of gray. Dressed in this vibrant color with her auburn hair swept into a soft chignon and wearing the simple pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's, she looked powerful. The dress wasn't armor. It was a revelation. It was a reminder of the woman she had been before Brendan had chiseled her down into a shape that suited him. The night of the gala, her stomach was a knot of anxiety. She took a taxi to the Grand Astoria, a landmark of old-world luxury that Brendan's firm was probably already petitioning to tear down and replace with a skyscraper. The entrance was a blinding flurry of camera flashes and flowing gowns. Celebrities, socialites, and the titans of the industry swept up the grand marble staircase. Audrey paid her taxi driver and took a deep breath, clutching her small borrowed purse. She felt like an imposter crashing a royal wedding. As she walked up the steps, keeping to the edge of the red carpet, she saw him. Brendan was preening for the cameras, his arm around Tiffany, who was wearing a dress that seemed to be made of strategically placed diamonds and not much else. It was shockingly expensive and left nothing to the imagination. Brendan beamed, whispering in her ear, making her giggle. They were the king and queen of the ball. Audrey slipped past the press line, her heart hammering against her ribs. She gave her name at the door and was handed a program. Her hands were trembling. Inside the ballroom was breathtaking. A sea of elegantly dressed people mingled under chandeliers that dripped with crystals like frozen waterfalls. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The air buzzed with power, money, and ambition. She made a beeline for the bar at the far end of the room, hoping to find a quiet corner where she could observe without being observed. She ordered a glass of champagne, the bubbles doing little to calm her nerves. From her vantage point, she had a clear view of the room, and there they were holding court in the center of it all. Brendan looking impossibly handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo, and Tiffany dazzling and animated, touching his arm possessively. People flocked to them, laughing at Brendan's jokes, complimenting Tiffany's dress. Audrey took a sip of her champagne, the cold liquid a stark contrast to the burning in her chest. This was a mistake, a colossal mistake. She shouldn't have come. She was a relic from a past life, a ghost haunting the edges of Brendan's new shiny existence. Every laugh from his circle felt like a jab. Every admiring glance thrown Tiffany's way was a fresh twist of the knife. She saw a few familiar faces. People who had been their friends, who had come to their home for dinner parties she had painstakingly cooked and hosted. They saw her too. She could see the flicker of recognition followed by a quick, awkward glance away. They had chosen their side. She was about to drain her glass and make a quiet escape when a voice she had hoped never to hear again cut through the noise. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in." She froze, her back rigid. She didn't have to turn to know who it was. The smug, condescending tone was unmistakable. Slowly she turned to face him. Brendan stood before her, Tiffany clinging to his arm, her blue eyes scanning Audrey with a look of bored disdain. "Brendan." Audrey said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tiffany." "I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you here," Brendan said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "I didn't think this was really your scene anymore." He gestured vaguely at her, his gaze sweeping over her dress with mock appreciation. "You clean up nicely, though. For a moment there, I almost didn't recognize you." The insult wrapped in a flimsy compliment landed exactly as he intended. He was reminding her of her new lower station in life, of the days she spent in jeans and old sweaters, too heartbroken to care about her appearance. Tiffany let out a delicate, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Brendan, be nice," she cooed, though her eyes were anything but. She looked Audrey up and down again. "That's a lovely color on you. Vintage, isn't it?" The word vintage was pronounced as if it meant second-hand and pathetic. Audrey's grip on her champagne flute tightened. "It's classic," she replied, her voice level. A few of Brendan's colleagues and their wives had drifted over, drawn by the scent of drama. They formed a semicircle, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The stage was set. Audrey was always the quiet, artistic type, Brendan explained to the small audience, placing a patronizing hand on her shoulder for a brief moment before letting it drop. "This is my brilliant Audrey, my starter wife." The term hung in the air, ugly and sharp. A few people gasped quietly. It was a brutal public dismissal of their 10 years together, reducing her to a practice round before the main event. Audrey felt the blood drain from her face. She could feel the eyes of everyone around them, their pity burning her skin. "She used to dabble in drawing," Tiffany added, chiming in perfectly. "Little sketches of buildings and things. It was so quaint. Brendan showed me some of them. He keeps them in a box in the attic, I think, like old children's drawings." That was the deepest cut of all. Her work her soul poured onto paper, dismissed as childish scribbles and relegated to a box in the attic of the house she had designed and decorated, the house he now shared with this woman. "I'm an architect," Audrey said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. She hadn't said them with any conviction in years. Brendan chuckled, a deep, dismissive sound. "She was a student, a very promising one, of course," he said to the group as if Audrey wasn't even there. "But life happens. The real world is a bit more demanding than a university classroom. It takes a certain killer instinct. Not everyone has it." He was painting a picture of her as a fragile, delicate thing who couldn't handle the pressures of the real world, a dreamer he had to leave behind to achieve his own greatness. He was rewriting their history in real time, and she was being cast as the tragic, failed supporting character. She wanted to run. She wanted to throw her drink in his smug face. She wanted to scream at all of them for standing there watching her humiliation as if it were a spectator sport. But she did none of those things. She simply stood there frozen as her past was being publicly executed. The string quartet seemed to swell its cheerful music, a mocking soundtrack to her despair. She felt utterly, completely alone. Her plan to hold her head high was a laughable failure. All she had done was walk willingly into her own ambush. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. She just gave a tight, sad nod and turned to leave her dignity in tatters. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry, not here. But as she turned, a sudden profound hush fell over the garrulous ballroom. It wasn't a gradual quieting, it was an abrupt cessation of sound, as if a switch had been flipped. The music stopped mid-note. The chatter died. Every head in the vast gilded room turned in unison toward the grand entrance. Audrey, caught in the sudden silence, turned to her own escape, forgotten for a moment. What could possibly command the attention of a room so saturated with ego? Framed in the grand archway of the ballroom was a man who seemed to carry his own center of gravity. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a sharp, intelligent face. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored black suit, no frills, no flashy watch, just an aura of immense, unshakable authority. Audrey didn't know who he was, but it was clear that everyone else did. Whispers erupted like wildfire through the silent room. "It's him." "I don't believe it. He never comes to these things." "That's Arthur Beaumont." The name registered even with Audrey. Arthur Beaumont was more than a billionaire. He was a legend, a titan of industry who had built his empire not on ruthless takeovers but on visionary innovation and ethical development. He didn't just construct buildings. He created landmarks that honored their environment and the people who used them. He was famously reclusive, a man who valued substance over spectacle and rarely made public appearances, preferring to let his world-changing work speak for itself. His presence here was the equivalent of a solar eclipse. Brendan's posture changed instantly. His shoulders straightened, his smug grin replaced by a look of intense, avaricious focus. This was the holy grail of networking. A single handshake with Arthur Beaumont could secure a career for life. "Beaumont," Brendan muttered almost to himself. He smoothed down his tie completely, forgetting about Audrey. "Tiffany, darling, stay close. This is our chance." Mr. Beaumont began to move into the room, flanked by two discreet security guards. He walked with a quiet, deliberate confidence, his piercing gray eyes scanning the crowd, not with arrogance but with a palpable sense of purpose. He wasn't here to mingle. He was looking for something. Or someone. The most powerful people in the room, CEOs and development moguls who were used to being the center of attention, began to subtly reposition themselves, trying to place themselves in his path. It was a slow-motion dance of sycophants. They were like iron filings being drawn to a powerful magnet. Brendan was no exception. Grabbing Tiffany's hand, he began to move through the crowd, his intention clear. He was going to intercept Arthur Beaumont. Audrey watched, a detached observer now. Her own humiliation seemed trivial in the face of this massive shift in the room's energy. Brendan managed to position himself perfectly just as Beaumont was passing the central fountain. "Mr. Beaumont, sir," Brendan began, his voice oozing a practiced, confident charm. "Brendan Walsh from Sterling Walsh Development. It's a true honor." He extended his hand. Beaumont paused, his sharp eyes flicking to Brendan's outstretched hand, then to his face. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod and shook the hand briefly, his grip firm and his expression unreadable. "Mr. Walsh," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded silence. "We're the firm behind the new Titan Tower downtown." Brendan pressed on, desperate to make an impression. "I'm sure you've seen the—" "I have." Beaumont cut him off, his tone flat, betraying no interest. His eyes were already moving again, continuing their methodical scan of the room, passing over the sea of eager, important faces. It was clear he was not interested in Brendan or his tower. The dismissal was subtle but absolute. Brendan's face fell, the confident smile faltering for a second before he replaced it with a strained one. He had been weighed, measured, and found wanting in less than 10 seconds. Audrey felt a strange, detached sense of vindication. She watched as Beaumont's gaze swept past the mayor, past a famous actress, past the heads of the city's largest banks. His eyes were intelligent, discerning, and they held a look of profound, almost weary patience. He was a man searching for a needle in a haystack of mediocrity. And then his search stopped. His eyes from across the crowded, cavernous room locked directly onto hers. Audrey's breath caught in her throat. It had to be a mistake. He must be looking at someone behind her. She instinctively glanced over her shoulder, but there was only a large potted palm and a waiter carrying a tray of drinks. She looked back. His gaze hadn't moved. It was fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. The powerful, enigmatic Arthur Beaumont was looking right at her. And then, to the utter astonishment of every single person in the ballroom, he began to walk in her direction. Time seemed to slow down. As Arthur Beaumont moved, a path cleared before him. The throng of socialites and power brokers who had been so desperate for his attention moments before now parted like the Red Sea. They stared slack-jawed as this legendary figure strode past them, his focus unwavering. He wasn't just walking in her general direction. He was on a direct and unmistakable trajectory toward Audrey. Brendan and Tiffany stood frozen, their own failed attempt to capture his attention still stinging. They watched with baffled indignation. Why was he walking toward her, the pathetic ex-wife in the simple green dress? It didn't make any sense. It was a glitch in the social matrix of the evening. Audrey's mind raced. Did she know him? Had they met somewhere? She searched his face for any flicker of recognition but found none. He was a complete stranger. Maybe he had mistaken her for someone else. Yes, that had to be it. She was about to try to shrink back into the shadows to disappear before he reached her, and the inevitable awkward correction occurred. But she couldn't move. She was pinned by the intensity of his gaze. There was no doubt or confusion in his eyes. There was only a look of dawning profound discovery. He came to a stop directly in front of her, ignoring the stunned silence of the room and the gawking faces of Brendan's circle. He was taller than she had expected, and up close his presence was even more formidable. He studied her face for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the hushed room. It was a voice accustomed to being listened to. "I know this is an unusual question, but I have been searching for someone for a very long time." Audrey could only knot her throat too tight to speak. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He looked at her, truly looked at her in a way no one had in years. It wasn't the dismissive glance of Brendan or the pitying stare of their former friends. It was a look of deep, respectful inquiry. "Are you by any chance A.V. Sterling?" he asked. The name, her secret name, the one she had buried under years of pain and regret, hit her like a physical blow. A.V. Sterling, the ghost of the architect she was supposed to be. How could this man possibly know that name? Brendan, standing just a few feet away, heard it. His head whipped around, his eyes wide with disbelief. A.V. Sterling. He knew that name. It was from the competition. The one he'd told her she'd lost. The one he'd mocked her for. Audrey stared at the billionaire, her mind reeling. She couldn't find her voice. All she could do was give another small, almost imperceptible nod. A slow smile spread across Arthur Beaumont's face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated relief and triumph, a smile that transformed his stern features, making him look years younger. "I knew it," he breathed, his voice filled with a genuine, heartfelt awe that silenced the few remaining whispers in the room. "I knew I would find you eventually." He held out his hand, not for a handshake, but palm up, an invitation. Hesitantly, Audrey placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, a steady anchor in the dizzying swirl of her emotions. And then, in front of the entire glittering assembly of New York's elite, in front of her arrogant ex-husband and his vapid new wife, the legendary Arthur Beaumont did something no one could have ever predicted. With a grace that belied his age and power, Arthur Beaumont brought Audrey's hand to his lips. He didn't just peck it, he bowed his head in a gesture of profound, almost reverent respect, and placed a gentle, deliberate kiss on her knuckles. "It is the greatest honor of my career to finally meet you, Ms. Sterling," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. He straightened up, but he did not release her hand. "Your work is not just architecture. It is poetry cast in stone and light." For a full second the room remained utterly silent, suspended in a state of collective shock. Brendan's face was a grotesque mask of confusion, his jaw hanging open. Tiffany looked as if she had been slapped. Then a sound started at the back of the room. It was a single person, an older architect with a reputation for being a purist, who began to clap. He was followed by another, then a dozen more. The applause spread through the ballroom like a tidal wave growing from a ripple into a deafening roar. And then the unthinkable happened. That same old architect, as if compelled by an unspoken command, rose from his seat. An elderly woman at a nearby table, a celebrated philanthropist, followed suit. In a slow, cascading wave, every single person in that ballroom who was seated got to their feet. Those who were standing like Brendan and his circle were suddenly the lowest people in the room. Everyone stood. They weren't just applauding, they were giving a standing ovation. To her. To Audrey. The sound was thunderous, washing over her, shaking her to her core. It was a validation so total, so public, and so overwhelming that she felt tears welling in her eyes. The Ethelgard Prize. Beaumont explained, his voice low and meant only for her, though everyone was straining to hear. I was the head judge that year. Your submission for the community library. It was anonymous, of course, but it was a masterpiece. A perfect fusion of humanism and environmental design. It won unanimously. We tried to contact the winner, but the entry was submitted through a P.O. box that was closed shortly after. The creator never came forward. He looked at her with genuine bewilderment and admiration. We have been searching for A.V. Sterling for 5 years. Why did you hide? Why did you never claim your prize? The question hung in the air. Audrey's gaze flickered for a fraction of a second to Brendan. Her ex-husband, the man who had built his career on ego and steel, looked as though he had been turned to stone. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. He was replaying that moment in his mind, the moment he had scanned the list of winners online. But he hadn't been looking for winners. He'd only been looking for her name on the list of runners-up, the losers. He had never even considered the possibility that she could have won. He hadn't just lied to her. He had been so blinded by his own arrogance that he had missed the truth entirely. He had told her she'd lost, and in doing so, he had stolen her triumph, her career, her very identity. Audrey turned her attention back to Mr. Beaumont, the roar of the crowd finally beginning to subside. She found her voice, and when she spoke it was clear and strong, with no trace of the timid woman who had entered the gala an hour before. I was told that I didn't win, she said simply. Arthur Beaumont's perceptive eyes followed her brief glance toward Brendan. He understood instantly. A look of cold, quiet fury passed over his features. He gave Brendan a look of such withering contempt that it seemed to physically shrink him. Then he turned back to Audrey, his expression softening once more. Well, he said, gently squeezing her hand, a great injustice has been done, an injustice I intend to personally correct, starting tonight. Ignoring Brendan and the stunned crowd completely, Arthur Beaumont offered Audrey his arm. Would you accompany me, Ms. Sterling? I believe we have 5 years of conversation to catch up on, and I have a business proposal for you that simply cannot wait. As if in a dream, Audrey placed her hand on his arm. He led her away from the center of the room, away from the wreckage of her past, and toward a quiet private alcove near the terrace. The crowd parted for them once more, but this time the onlookers' faces were filled with awe and admiration. As they walked, reporters who had been covering the gala's red carpet swarmed in, their cameras flashing, microphones extended. Mr. Beaumont, who is this woman? Is this the mysterious A.V. Sterling? What project are you discussing? Beaumont's security team materialized, forming a polite but impassable barrier. Mr. Beaumont will be releasing a statement in the morning, one of them said calmly. For now, please respect his privacy. Audrey caught a final glimpse of Brendan over her shoulder. He was standing alone, Tiffany having taken a subconscious step away from him, as if he were suddenly radioactive. His face was ashen. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was ruined. In a world built on reputation and perception, he had just been publicly exposed not just as a cruel husband, but as a fool of monumental proportions. He had thrown away a diamond, and the entire world had just watched another man pick it up. The friends who had been fawning over him minutes earlier were now avoiding his gaze, whispering amongst themselves. His social currency had evaporated in an instant. Once they reached the quiet alcove, Beaumont gestured for Audrey to sit at a small, secluded table. A waiter appeared as if from nowhere, placing 2 glasses of sparkling water before them. First things first, Beaumont said, his tone all business, though his eyes were kind. The prize for the Ethelgard. It was $250,000. It's been held in a trust for you for the past 5 years, accumulating interest. It's now worth well over $300,000. My legal team will arrange the transfer tomorrow. Audrey stared at him speechless. That was life-changing money. It was freedom. It was a new start. But that's the least of it, he continued, leaning forward, his voice filled with passion. Audrey, may I call you Audrey? Your design for that library was more than just a winning entry. It was a philosophy. It was the future. For years, my foundation has been looking for a flagship project, a centerpiece for our new philanthropic campus, focused on literacy and sustainable community development. I want to build your library, full scale, exactly as you designed it, with an unlimited budget. Tears streamed down Audrey's face now, but they were not tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming cathartic release. Every dream she had been forced to bury, every ounce of talent she had been told was worthless, was now being resurrected in the most spectacular way imaginable. There's more, he said, his expression serious. I didn't just build a company, Audrey. I built a team of the best minds in the world. But we have a void. We have brilliant engineers and financiers, but we lack a soul, a guiding architectural vision. I am formally offering you the position of Chief Creative Officer of Beaumont Enterprises. You would have oversight on all our global projects, a blank check to form your own design division, and the freedom to pursue the kind of work you were born to do. He wasn't offering her a job. He was offering her a kingdom. The world he had just invited her into was not Brendan's world of flashy towers and shallow victories. It was a world where her ideas, her vision, and her heart would be the most valuable assets. She looked across the ballroom, now a distant, glittering landscape. Brendan and Tiffany were nowhere to be seen. They had fled their own party in disgrace. Her past had not just been faced, it had been vanquished. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story of the gala was everywhere. The lost genius billionaire Arthur Beaumont finds mystery architect A.V. Sterling was the headline on the cover of every major architectural journal and society magazine. Her name, both of them, was on the lips of everyone in the industry. Her photo, a candid shot of her looking radiant as she spoke with Beaumont, was splashed across the internet. Brendan tried to call. The first voicemail was left the morning after the gala. He sounded frantic, desperate. Audrey, honey, it's me. I am so sorry. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I never looked at the winners list. I just assumed. We need to talk. This is incredible news for us. The us was laughable. She deleted the message without a second thought. The second voicemail came a day later. His tone had shifted to indignation. Are you seriously not going to call me back? After everything I did for you, I supported you for years. I pushed you to be better. You wouldn't have even had the confidence to enter that competition without me. I'm entitled to a part of this, Audrey. My lawyers will be in touch. She deleted that one too and then blocked his number. He was a ghost now, a pathetic echo she no longer had to listen to. Her life, meanwhile, had transformed. Beaumont had sent a car to pick her up on Monday morning, a sleek, quiet electric vehicle that glided through the city traffic. It took her not to a stuffy office, but to a beautifully designed penthouse suite at a hotel he owned, which he had converted into a temporary design studio for her. It was filled with state-of-the-art equipment, every book she had ever wanted to own, and a stunning view of the city skyline. Your new headquarters, Beaumont had said with a smile when he met her there, until your permanent office, which you will of course design yourself, is ready. For the first time in years, Audrey felt the pure, unadulterated joy of creation. She worked tirelessly, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The ideas that had been dormant for so long came flooding back. She sketched, she drafted, she built models. She met with Beaumont's team of engineers and project managers, sharp, brilliant people who listened to her with a deference and respect that was intoxicating. They didn't see a starter wife or a hobbyist. They saw their new boss a visionary. A week after the gala, Arthur Beaumont took her to see the proposed site for the library. It was a sprawling, neglected plot of land overlooking the river, a forgotten corner of the city. As they stood on a small hill, the wind whipping her hair, he unrolled a preliminary site plan. "This is where your vision will take root," he said, his voice filled with a quiet satisfaction. Audrey looked out at the city, at the forest of skyscrapers that pierced the clouds. Among them was the Titan Tower, Brendan's proudest achievement. From this distance it looked small, insignificant. Just another glass box in a city of glass boxes. It had no soul. Her library, she thought, would be different. It wouldn't scrape the sky. It would embrace the earth. It would be a place of quiet refuge and loud discovery, a building that served the people, not the ego of its creator. Beaumont was watching her, his expression warm. "Brendan Walsh built things," he said, as if reading her mind. "You, Audrey, create them. There is a profound difference." In that moment, Audrey finally understood. The humiliation she had felt at the gala wasn't the end of her story. It was the pressure that had finally cracked open the shell she had been hiding in. Brendan hadn't erased her past. He had merely been an obstacle in her path. A path that had, against all odds, led her right here. Standing on the foundation of her future blueprints for a new life clutched firmly in her hand, she was no longer A.V. Sterling, the hidden genius, or Audrey Shelton, the broken ex-wife. She was simply Audrey. And she was finally gloriously home. 6 months passed, and the seasons turned. Autumn's chill gave way to the quiet blanket of winter, which in turn yielded to the vibrant promise of spring. For Audrey, it was a season of unprecedented growth. She was no longer just Audrey Shelton, the woman scorned, or A.V. Sterling, the name whispered in awe. She was Audrey Sterling, Chief Creative Officer of Beaumont Enterprises, a name she had legally reclaimed, blending her past and her future into a single powerful identity. The site overlooking the river was no longer a neglected patch of earth. It was a hive of meticulous activity, cleared and graded in preparation for the birth of a landmark. Today was the groundbreaking ceremony for the Beaumont Sterling Library of Light. It was a major city event attended by the mayor, city council members, philanthropists, and a throng of press. Audrey stood at a podium, the gentle spring breeze tugging at the lapels of her sharp, elegant navy blue pantsuit. She looked out at the sea of faces, her confidence a quiet, steady flame. Arthur Beaumont sat in the front row looking at her with an expression of paternal pride. "A building is more than just a structure," Audrey began, her voice clear and resonant, amplified by the microphone. "It is a vessel for our hopes. It is a testament to our values. It can be a cage or it can be a key. For years, I believed my own voice was meant for the quietest of rooms, for blueprints that would never see the light of day. I was taught to believe that a dream was a fragile, frivolous thing easily packed away in a box and forgotten in an attic." Her eyes scanned the crowd, and for a fleeting moment she saw them. Standing at the very back behind the last row of chairs were Brendan and Tiffany. They were a ghost image of the power couple from the gala. Brendan's custom suit was gone, replaced by one that looked ill-fitting and slightly rumpled. His face was gaunt, his posture hunched with a bitter resentment. The press had been merciless after the gala, and clients had fled Sterling Walsh Development in droves. His empire was crumbling. Tiffany stood beside him, her expression a cocktail of boredom and fury. She was tapping impatiently on her phone, her glamorous dress looking garish and out of place against the backdrop of construction equipment. Audrey didn't falter. Seeing him didn't trigger a pang of hurt or a spike of anger. It triggered nothing at all. He was just a man in the crowd. But a dream, a true one, is not so easily discarded. She continued, her voice gaining strength. It is resilient. It can lie dormant, waiting for a single ray of light. This library is that light. It will be a place where no voice is too quiet, no dream too fragile. It will be a key, not a cage, for every single person who walks through its doors. She finished her speech to thunderous applause. After the ceremonial shovels had turned the earth, she was engulfed by well-wishers. As Arthur Beaumont was congratulating her, a commotion started at the edge of the crowd. "Let me through. I need to speak to her. I have a right to be here." It was Brendan. He pushed his way through the reporters, his face red and blotchy, a desperate, wild look in his eyes. Tiffany trailed reluctantly behind him, her face a mask of mortification. He broke through the circle of people and stopped in front of Audrey. "Audrey, this is incredible," he said, his voice a strained attempt at the old charming tone. "Our dream finally coming true." The audacity of the statement left a pocket of silence around them. The reporters' cameras and microphones were instantly trained on the unfolding drama. "I don't believe we have any shared dreams, Brendan," Audrey replied, her voice calm and cold as ice. "Don't be like that," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I was your mentor. I paid for your education. I supported your hobby for years. I made you who you are. This library. It was born in my house. I deserve to be a part of this. It's only fair." Audrey looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw him for the hollow, pathetic man he was. The fear was gone. The pain was gone. All that was left was a profound sense of clarity. "You're right, Brendan," she said, and he blinked, surprised. "You did play a part in who I am today. You built the cage, and for that I am almost grateful. Because there is no feeling more liberating than the moment you realize you have the strength to break the bars yourself." She leaned in slightly. "You didn't make me. You nearly erased me. The difference is I survived you. I doubt very much you'll be able to survive yourself." Brendan recoiled as if she had struck him. He opened his mouth to retaliate, but before he could, another voice cut in. "He's a parasite." All heads turned to Tiffany. She had stepped forward, her expression one of calculated disdain. She looked directly at a reporter with a camera. "I'm leaving him," she announced, her voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. "I had no idea he was the kind of man who would try to steal his own wife's accomplishments. He lied to me just like he lied to her. I can't be associated with a failure and a thief." With that, she turned on her heel, her Louboutin sinking slightly in the soft dirt, and stalked away toward the street, presumably to call a taxi and leave Brendan in the rubble of the life he himself had destroyed. Brendan stood frozen, his face a canvas of utter devastation. Humiliated at the gala, exposed at the groundbreaking, and now publicly abandoned by his trophy wife. It was a complete and total annihilation. Security guards moved in discreetly and escorted a stunned, silent Brendan away from the ceremony. Audrey watched him go, feeling not a shred of victory, only the quiet peace of a long overdue ending. Arthur Beaumont placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Some people build towers of glass," he said softly. "And some people, Audrey, build legacies of light. Let's go check on yours." She turned away from the ghost of her past and looked toward the future, the churned earth, the waiting machinery, and the empty space where her dream, stronger and more resilient than ever, would finally rise. 2 years later, the Beaumont Sterling Library of Light was no longer a blueprint or a construction site. It was a reality, a living poem of glass, wood, and stone nestled by the river. It didn't dominate the skyline like Brendan's aggressive towers. It conversed with it. The building rose in gentle sweeping curves, its living roof a lush tapestry of native grasses and wildflowers that changed with the seasons. Sunlight streamed through vast, strategically placed windows, illuminating the warm wood of the interior and creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the thousands of books lining the shelves. It was exactly as Audrey had dreamed it, but infinitely more real. Audrey walked through the main atrium, the scent of fresh wood and old paper filling the air. Her heels clicked softly on the polished concrete floors. She was no longer the hesitant woman in a borrowed dress. Today she wore a tailored, cream-colored suit, her auburn hair cut in a chic professional style. Her presence filled the space with a quiet authority that was born not of ego, but of deep, earned confidence. Her days were filled with meetings, design reviews for Beaumont projects across the globe, and mentoring young architects she had brought onto her team. She was not just building structures, She was building a new culture at the company, one founded on vision, collaboration, and integrity. Her relationship with Arthur Beaumont had evolved into a partnership of profound respect and deep affection. He was her mentor, her champion, and her closest friend. They shared a passion for creating spaces that served humanity, a silent understanding that transcended words. There was a quiet romance to their partnership, not one of fiery passion, but of two brilliant minds and kindred spirits finding solace and strength in one another. One afternoon, as she was reviewing the final lighting installations in the children's wing, her assistant, a bright young architect named Maria, approached her with a tablet. "Audrey, I'm sorry to interrupt," Maria said hesitantly, "but I thought you might want to see this. It's trending on a few financial news sites." On the screen was an article with a grainy, unflattering picture of Brendan Walsh. The headline read, "Disgraced Developer. Brendan Walsh files for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Sterling Walsh assets to be liquidated." The article detailed the complete collapse of his firm, citing a catastrophic loss of investor confidence and a string of failed projects. It mentioned his acrimonious and very public divorce from Tiffany and a series of lawsuits from former clients. At the end of the article, a single bleak sentence stood out. "Mr. Walsh is reportedly now living in a small rented apartment in New Jersey, having lost his properties in the city." Audrey read the words and felt a surprising lack of emotion. There was no joy, no schadenfreude, no lingering anger. It was like reading a footnote from a history book, a chapter that was so thoroughly finished it had lost all power over her. Brendan's fate was a consequence of his own choices, a tower of arrogance that had finally collapsed under its own weight. She had not pushed him. She had simply outgrown him. "Thank you, Maria," Audrey said, handing the tablet back. "It's old news." Maria smiled, understanding completely. The evening before the library's grand opening, Audrey stood with Arthur on the building's main terrace overlooking the glittering expanse of the city as dusk settled. The lights of the skyscrapers began to twinkle, including the distant, anonymous gleam of Titan Tower. "It's magnificent, Audrey," Arthur said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "It's more than I ever imagined." "It's everything I ever imagined," she replied softly, a contented smile on her face. "It's a place for second chances." "You are a testament to that," he said, turning to her. In his eyes she saw not just the billionaire titan of industry, but the man who had looked across a crowded room and seen her when she was invisible to everyone else, including herself. "You didn't need me to save you, Audrey," he said, as if sensing her thoughts. "You only needed someone to get out of your way." He reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and familiar. It was not the gesture of a man claiming a prize, but of an equal honoring his partner. In the quiet of the twilight, with the city lights blazing before them and the monumental achievement of her dream standing solid around them, Audrey felt the last ghost of her past finally fade into nothing. She wasn't an ex-wife, a hidden genius, or a project. She was the architect of her own life, and from this vantage point the future she was building looked infinite. What a story of triumph and karmic justice! Audrey's journey reminds us that our true worth is never defined by those who try to diminish us. For years she allowed her brilliance to be buried under someone else's ambition and cruelty, but talent, like a powerful river, will always find its way to the sea. The moment Arthur Beaumont kissed her hand wasn't just a shock to her ex-husband. It was a validation for anyone who has ever been made to feel small, overlooked, or forgotten. It proves that the world is full of people who can't see the value in front of them. But it is also full of those who spend their lives searching for true, authentic brilliance. Her victory wasn't just in her newfound fame and fortune, but in reclaiming the identity she had sacrificed for a love that was never real. She didn't need a billionaire to save her. She just needed someone to hold up a mirror and show her the powerful creator she had been all along. Thank you for listening to this incredible story. If you were moved by Audrey's journey, please give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden strength. And for more stories of justice and empowerment, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next video.
A single midnight text shattered Eloise Ainsworth's life, and she never saw it coming. Thunder rumbled violently outside their coastal mansion, lightning splitting the sky, casting harsh shadows across the grand bedroom. Inside, Eloise lay restless, 7 months pregnant and desperate for sleep. Beside her, Damien Ainsworth slept soundly, unaware that the empire he had meticulously built was moments away from collapsing beneath him. Eloise tossed fitfully, struggling against the relentless ache in her spine and the heaviness in her belly. Just as she was about to drift off, a soft glow illuminated Damien's phone on the nightstand. She reached over instinctively, planning only to silence it. Yet the screen's gentle light revealed something far darker than she ever imagined. 3 simple words burned into her mind. "I miss you." Eloise's breath halted painfully, and her heart surged in her chest, each beat louder than the storm outside. A name appeared above the message: Lucretia Wolford. Eloise's mind raced, frantically scanning her memory, yet no one by that name had ever been mentioned. Panic clawed at her throat. She cast a quick, terrified glance at her sleeping husband, who remained oblivious, serene even, in his deception. Feeling both violated and compelled, Eloise's trembling fingers scrolled back through the message thread. Professional conversations shifted swiftly into flirtatious exchanges, each line intensifying into a betrayal she couldn't deny. Her hands shook violently as she absorbed the full, devastating reality. She placed a protective hand over her unborn child, desperately trying to steady her breathing. Her baby kicked sharply, as if sensing her mother's distress. How could Damien, the man who whispered tender promises of devotion and family, have done this to her? To them? Tears stung her eyes, yet rage surged beneath her sorrow. The glow of the phone screen dimmed, plunging the room back into darkness. But for Eloise, nothing would ever feel safe again. Unable to bear the thought of confronting Damien yet, she lay awake, trapped in her spiraling thoughts. She didn't yet know how she'd face the morning, let alone her husband. All she knew was that her marriage, built on trust, now shattered by a secret mistress, hung by the most fragile of threads. And she, pregnant and betrayed, held the scissors. Comment 1 if you felt Eloise's heartbreak deeply, or 2 if you think Damien deserves a chance to explain himself. Tell me where you're watching from. Your comments truly matter. Morning came with the gentle hush of sea breezes, but inside Eloise's mind, a storm raged on. She rose quietly, slipped into a loose robe, and padded downstairs. In the kitchen, she tried to make herself some tea, but the mere act of filling the kettle felt surreal. How could something as ordinary as boiling water feel so trivial when her entire reality had shifted? Memories flashed through her mind. Damien's jubilant laughter when they first discovered she was pregnant. The way he'd cradle her belly at night and whisper promises of a future brimming with love. The messages she'd read only hours ago were like acid scorching those tender recollections. Damien strode into the kitchen soon after, still confident in his crisp collared shirt, tie hanging loose around his neck. He greeted her with a muted smile. Perhaps he noticed her tired eyes or the slight quiver in her movements, but he said nothing. Eloise felt words burrowing under her tongue, itching to be released, yet fear kept her silent. If she confronted him, would he deny everything? Or worse, would he confirm it? They ate breakfast in painful politeness, him sipping strong coffee, her nibbling toast she could barely taste. She excused herself, and before Damien could reply, she was already climbing the stairs, needing the solace of their half-finished nursery. A room that once symbolized joy, but now felt steeped in uncertainty. Soft pastel walls, a crib waiting to be assembled, and a rocking chair that Eloise had imagined herself using while singing lullabies. Could she still trust that vision? Reaching for her phone, Eloise dialed Aurelia Dimitrov, her closest friend and a formidable corporate lawyer. Aurelia answered immediately, concern anchoring her voice. Eloise's tears flowed as she confessed everything. The midnight text, the swirling betrayal, the dread of confronting Damien in her fragile state. Aurelia urged her to remain calm and let the truth unfold carefully. She promised to drive over after midday to offer support and potentially a plan of action. Take a moment to share your thoughts. Comment 1, if you think Eloise should confront Damien now, or 2, if she should gather more evidence first. Your voice matters in this unfolding drama. Noon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting squares of warm brightness across the marble floors. Eloise had retreated to a small alcove in the massive foyer, sitting on a cushioned bench while trying to quell the roar of her turbulent thoughts. She saw Damien step out the front door, likely off to a business meeting. The moment the heavy door closed behind him, relief and panic mixed in her chest. Relief that she didn't have to face him yet, and panic at the yawning emptiness he left behind. When Aurelia finally arrived, her resolute footfalls echoed in the grand hall. She was tall and poised, her short jacket complementing her sharp gaze. They barely made it to the sitting room before Eloise began sobbing openly. Aurelia enveloped her in a hug. "You're not alone," she murmured, "but we must act carefully. You're in a delicate condition, and I don't want you risking your health over the shock of it all." Eloise told her friend every detail, from the first suspicious text to the more intimate messages she had uncovered in Damien's phone. Each word felt like it might break her, yet a small sense of calm followed each confession. Aurelia guided her gently. "First, you need proof. Screenshots, copies of messages, anything that might show a pattern. If Damien tries to spin the story, you'll have evidence. Second, we'll decide how to confront him. We can do it privately, or if you feel unsafe or too upset, I'll mediate." Eloise nodded, realizing her baby fluttered in her womb, as if sensing the heaviness of the conversation. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling both heartbreak and protective instinct collide. This wasn't just about her, it was about a future she had nurtured for months. Before leaving, Aurelia squeezed Eloise's hands. "Promise me you'll stay calm and put your well-being first. Damien has to answer for this, but there's no solution if you collapse from stress." Eloise agreed, thanking Aurelia for her unwavering support. In the echoing hush after her friend's departure, Eloise felt the house's emptiness closing in. That half-packed suitcase in her closet tempted her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to leave, but the simple idea of escaping was intoxicating. If you're still here, comment, "I'm staying," if you want to see how this unfolds. And where are you reading from? Let us know. It's always fascinating to see our global audience. By late afternoon, Damien returned, wearing an air of forced composure. Perhaps he sensed that something was amiss. Eloise noticed him scanning the halls, as though the house's silence felt heavier than usual. She met him in his study, voice unsteady but gathering courage. "We need to talk." Damien nodded, swallowing. He set his leather briefcase aside and motioned to the tufted chair across from his mahogany desk. Eloise cut straight to the point. "I saw a message on your phone last night from Lucrezia Wolford." She forced herself to say the name without flinching. Immediately, Damien's face slackened, all color draining away. "You said she shouldn't have your number. She texted you at midnight. Why would she say, 'I miss you'?" Her questions spilled out with a trembling urgency, each one lighting a fuse of dread in the space between them. Damien's first attempt at denial emerged as a strangled sound. Finally, he exhaled. She was a consultant I met through a business network at a conference. We started talking about market expansions, potential partnerships. He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Eloise's anger flared. "And it evolved into an affair?" He shook his head. Nothing physical ever happened, but it got too close. It was stupid, and I was too weak to stop it before it went too far." His apologies tumbled forth in a rambling wave, but Eloise could barely listen. She felt her throat tighten as tears threatened. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was a fundamental violation of trust. "You should have told me," she managed, voice raw. "If you felt lonely or unappreciated, we could have talked. Instead, you found solace in a stranger." Damien reached for her hand, but she pulled away. A wedge of betrayal separated them like a canyon. "I'm sorry," he repeated over and over, but the words felt hollow, battered by the storm of her heartbreak. Eloise realized she was still trembling when she finally turned on her heel, tears blurring her vision. "I can't be here right now," she whispered, storming out of his study and leaving Damien alone with his remorse. Are you feeling Eloise's heartbreak? Comment 1 if you empathize with her anger, or 2 if you want to see Damien try harder to explain himself. And please share if you think they can salvage this marriage. The next few days were a whirlwind of private arguments, silent meals, and tense phone calls to Aurelia, who tried to counsel Eloise on the best legal and emotional approaches. At times, Eloise found herself in the empty nursery, hugging a plush teddy bear someone had gifted at her baby shower. She'd glance around at the walls adorned with whimsical clouds and stars, feeling a pang for the innocence she had lost. The baby fluttered within her, a quiet reminder that time marched forward, no matter how shattered she felt. In the midst of this strain, Damien called Aurelia directly, pleading for a chance to prove he was serious about repairing the marriage. He arranged an appointment with Dr. Sabine Queller, a highly regarded therapist known for her discretion with high-profile clients. Skeptical yet curious, Eloise agreed to attend. She told herself she owed it to her unborn child to explore every avenue before making a life-altering decision. The therapy sessions were held in a tasteful townhouse with minimalistic decor, exuding calm through its muted tones. Dr. Queller, a poised woman in her mid-40s, welcomed them with gentle confidence. In the first session, Eloise sat stiff-backed on a plush sofa, while Damien fidgeted on a nearby chair, his hands wrapped around each other as though they might slip away. "Let's start with honesty," Dr. Queller said, leaning forward. "Damien, please explain to Eloise what drew you to this consultant, Lucretia, and what you were seeking that you didn't find at home." Damien's voice shook as he explained, feeling overshadowed by Eloise's pregnancy preparations, her baby-centric conversations, her emotional focus on the future, all of which left him grappling with a lurking sense of inadequacy. The business conferences, the late-night texts, the exchanges with Lucretia became a dark well he fell into while searching for validation. Hearing him speak, Eloise vacillated between empathy and rage. She wanted to scream that he should have confided in her, that marriage was about weathering insecurities together, not running to someone else. But Dr. Queller encouraged them to speak calmly, guiding the conversation away from blame and toward revelation. "Where do you stand so far? Give me a 1 if you feel therapy might help them, or a 2 if this betrayal is beyond repair. Also, I'm curious, who's reading from overseas?" In the quieter moments between sessions, Eloise found herself reflecting on the years she'd spent building a life with Damien. Had there been signs of his loneliness that she had missed? She remembered their simpler days, cooking mediocre pasta dishes in a cramped apartment, staying up late laughing about random inside jokes. Back then, Damien used to share every thought, every dream, every fear with her. Over time, as they both found success, Damien in venture capital, Eloise in philanthropic work, they'd grown busier, more compartmentalized. Did that gradual distance pave the way for Lucretia? Meanwhile, Lucretia Wolford became an unmentionable ghost in the Ainsworth household. Eloise felt haunted by the midnight texts that triggered her heartbreak. She wondered about Lucretia's backstory. Was she calculating, or just as lost as Damien claimed to be? Aurelia dug into public records, uncovering that Lucretia had struggled financially for a while, hopping between consulting gigs. She had a certain brilliance for spotting market trends, but personal relationships seemed ephemeral. Perhaps Damien's money or status was a temptation, or perhaps it was just the emotional support he had been offering that enticed her. No matter the reason, Eloise remained fixated on the question, why didn't he talk to me first? On the third therapy session, Dr. Queller probed their unspoken resentment. Eloise confessed how she felt excluded, even replaced, by someone who arrived via a business contact. Damien broke down as he apologized for turning outward instead of inward, acknowledging that he'd lost faith in his own worth as a soon-to-be father. In Eloise's eyes, each word was a painful admission, but also a small step toward understanding. Could she find it in her heart to forgive, though? That remained uncertain. Outside, paparazzi had begun sniffing around, lured by whispers of the Ainsworth's marital trouble. The couple tried to appear composed in public, though Eloise mostly avoided social events. Tension brewed as tabloid speculation turned wilder. Damien dreaded the day an expose might surface, tarnishing his carefully curated image of success and philanthropy. The pressure to keep the scandal contained was a growing weight he couldn't escape. Feeling the tension? Share yes or no in the comments. Let's keep this story alive. Tell me, do you believe in second chances? Away from the therapy couch, life in high society didn't pause for their heartbreak. Serafina Lockwood, a strategic rival of Eloise's on charity committees, seized upon rumors of the Ainsworth scandal. She invited Eloise for a harmless luncheon under the guise of philanthropic discourse, but her sly remarks about disloyalty and marital strife made Eloise's skin crawl. Serafina thrived on overshadowing others through pointed gossip, and Eloise suspected she was fishing for first-hand confirmation to feed the rumor mill. Feeling cornered, Eloise offered few words. She couldn't trust Serafina, whose vacant sympathy was a front for collecting morsels of scandal. As Eloise excused herself from the plush dining room, she noticed a striking brunette quietly observing the conversation from a distance. For one stomach-turning moment, she wondered if that was Lucretia. But no, it was another consultant perhaps, or a new gossip hound clinging to Serafina's orbit. Damien, for his part, navigated a precarious professional environment. Colleagues sent curious glances his way during meetings, and a few daring junior executives whispered about the trouble at home. He took calls in private corners, ensuring he never let slip any detail that might confirm the swirling rumors. Deep inside, shame gnawed at him. He'd built an empire on trust. His employees believed in his leadership, investors admired his foresight, and philanthropic partners saw him as a moral anchor in a cutthroat business world. All of that threatened to crumble if he couldn't fix the fracture in his own marriage. At night, Damien sometimes found Eloise in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair while absent-mindedly stroking her belly. In that small pastel room, he glimpsed a tenderness in her that he feared was slipping away. "I'm here," he whispered once, tentatively reaching for her hand. She didn't recoil, but she didn't accept it either. "I'm trying," he added, voice tinged with desperation. A minute passed before Eloise murmured, "So am I," tears glistening in her eyes. Neither moved to close the distance, but neither walked away. Pause for a pulse check. Comment hope if you want them to reconcile, or done if you think Eloise should walk away. And don't forget to mention your city. We love connecting with readers worldwide. As tension simmered, an unexpected development took shape. Lucretia contacted Eloise directly. One afternoon, Eloise's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. The calm but cautious voice on the other end said, "I'm Lucretia Wolford. I'm sorry to call you like this, but I can't live under accusations and rumors anymore." Eloise's heart beat so violently she felt faint, yet she remained composed enough to hear Lucretia out. Lucretia offered a peculiar proposition. She wanted to meet, face to face, with no Damien, no lawyers, no distractions. Her reason? "I want you to know the truth," she said quietly. "I'm not looking for hush money or a scandal." Something in her tone hinted at genuine remorse. Eloise didn't know whether to believe her, but a part of her yearned for clarity. After all, the darkest corners of Eloise's mind conjured images of this woman as a slick temptress, preying on her marriage. If Lucretia was truly remorseful, could understanding her perspective help Eloise heal? They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe by the waterfront. Nervous energy rippled through Eloise as she arrived, scanning the modest tables until she spotted a lone woman with a subdued elegance. Lucretia appeared exhausted, her eyes lined with sleeplessness, her posture weighted by regret. They exchanged polite introductions, the silence between them pulsing with unspoken tension. Finally, Lucretia exhaled. "I'm not here to justify what Damien or I did, but I need you to know we never crossed a physical line. It was emotional, and I realize how damaging that can be." She revealed pieces of her background, financial struggles, a history of chasing fleeting validations, and an odd affinity for people who appeared perfect, yet hinted at hidden vulnerabilities. "Damien spoke so affectionately of you," she admitted, tears welling, "but he seemed lost. And I latched onto that. I'm sorry." Eloise fought the urge to scream that an emotional affair was no less painful, but she also perceived Lucretia's sincerity. In that strange moment, they both felt like casualties of a larger, more complex storm. Eloise left the cafe not with closure, but with fragments of a truth she hadn't possessed before. This woman, once seen only as an enemy, was human too, with her own shattered illusions. Should Eloise forgive Lucretia? Comment forgive if you believe in empathy, or never if the hurt is too deep. Also, keep sending those city shout-outs. We adore hearing from you. Days turned into weeks, and Eloise found herself navigating a maze of raw emotions. Therapy sessions with Dr. Sabine Queller were revealing deeper layers of the marriage dynamic. Damien recounted his childhood fears, a father whose perfectionism often led to harsh criticism, a mother who hovered between cold distance and lofty expectations. He confessed that he'd grown up believing he had to excel at everything, or else he wasn't worthy of love. Eloise recognized parallels in her own life. Times she buried her anxieties in philanthropic endeavors, presenting a calm front to everyone around her. Outside of therapy, they learned to talk again, slowly, carefully, with frequent check-ins. Damien showed Eloise his phone unprompted, explaining business messages and reassuring her that no hidden chats existed. Eloise, for her part, tried to voice her concerns without letting anger overshadow her words. Each step forward felt shaky, as if they were rebuilding a tower that had already begun to crumble. But the external world still threatened. A tabloid rumor circulated, hinting that Damien Ainsworth's marriage was on the rocks because of a mysterious woman. Though no names were printed, the public was quick to speculate. Serafina Lockwood was believed to be fueling the flames behind the scenes, feeding tidbits to hungry reporters. Aurelia Dimitrov rushed to contain the gossip, leveraging her legal acumen to threaten lawsuits against unscrupulous publications. The swirl of scandal made it harder for Damien and Eloise to find peace. Still, life marched on with unyielding momentum. Eloise's pregnancy approached its final weeks, bringing bouts of exhaustion and emotional fragility. One morning she wobbled in the kitchen, a wave of dizziness forcing her to sit. Damien, who happened to be present, rushed to her side, concern etched across his face. He helped her into a chair, got her a glass of water, and insisted they visit her obstetrician if the dizziness continued. It was a quiet moment of genuine care, a reminder of what love felt like before betrayal tainted it. As she sipped her water, she saw the fear in his eyes, and a small part of her wanted to reach out, to let him back in. Comment 1 if you sense hope, or 2 if you think another twist is coming. And take a moment to share how you found this story. Did a friend recommend it? An uneasy calm settled over the next few days. Damien took time off from his hectic travel schedule, determined to be more present for Eloise. He accompanied her to obstetric appointments, held her hand during routine tests, and dutifully rubbed her feet when the aches of late pregnancy became overwhelming. Though words like trust and forgiveness still felt loaded, they were starting to find small glimpses of closeness. Fragile, but real. One evening, as they rested in their living room, the phone rang unexpectedly. Eloise answered with a wary hello. A breathless voice came through the line. Serafina Lockwood herself. Her tone was exaggeratedly sweet, laced with undercurrents of concealed malice. Darling, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm hosting a charity benefit next week and wanted to personally invite you, both of you. It's for the Children's Art Academy, so it would be a wonderful cause to support. Eloise felt her stomach twist. Serafina's invitation was no altruistic gesture, yet refusing would spark more gossip. After a beat, she thanked Serafina for the invitation, promising to RSVP soon. When she hung up, Damien frowned. You don't have to go. Eloise nodded slowly. I know, but maybe facing her publicly will help quell rumors, or at least show we're not intimidated by gossip. They decided to accept the invitation, hoping a united front would signal that they were working through their troubles. Serafina, for all her cunning, wouldn't expect them to show up poised and unbroken. On the night of the event, Eloise dressed carefully. She chose an elegant gown that hugged her pregnant figure in a graceful silhouette, emphasizing her confidence rather than shying away from the spotlight. Damien wore a tailored black suit, his posture stiff but determined. As they stepped onto the event's red carpet, camera flashes strobed against the evening sky. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Eloise's heart pounded, but Damien offered his arm. She took it, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of solidarity. Whatever else they faced, they were confronting it together in that moment. Exhausted, hurt, but united. Who's still with us? Comment strong if you admire Eloise's courage. And do share if you have any questions about these characters' motivations. We love hearing your insights. Inside the grand hall, opulence reigned. Gold drapes and crystal chandeliers cast warm light on the assembled guests. Financiers, heiresses, celebrities, all mingling over flutes of champagne. A live quartet played softly in the background. At the center of it all stood Serafina Lockwood in a sequin gown, greeting everyone with a dazzling smile, especially as she approached the Ainsworths. "So glad you could make it," she cooed, air-kissing Eloise's cheeks. Then her gaze landed on Eloise's rounded belly, a brief flicker of something akin to envy crossing her features. "You look radiant," she added with an undertone that didn't quite match her flattering words. Damien gently guided Eloise away once politeness was satisfied, steering her to a quieter corner. They chatted with a handful of acquaintances, some genuinely concerned about Eloise's pregnancy and well-being, others obviously fishing for a juicy slip of information. Each time the topic edged into personal territory, Damien or Eloise deftly changed it back to the charity's mission. Just when it seemed they had navigated the worst of the evening, a hush fell near the entrance. Lucretia Wolford stepped inside, looking hesitant. Eloise froze in mid-sentence, a chill racing up her spine. Why would Lucretia show up here, unless someone invited her as a move in a larger game? Serafina's triumphant smirk from across the room answered that question. It was a calculated power play. Lucretia didn't greet the hosts. Instead, she edged along the perimeter as though wanting to disappear. Eloise excused herself from her conversation, the pulse in her temples pounding. Damien caught the shift in her demeanor. "Are you okay?" he whispered, placing a hand protectively on her back. Eloise nodded, though her heart felt like it might burst. She marched toward Lucretia, leaving Damien behind. When their eyes met, Lucretia's face reflected discomfort and regret. "I didn't want to come, but I'm under contract for a consulting job with Serafina," she confessed softly, scanning the room to ensure no one overheard. "I suspect she wanted to stir up drama by putting us in the same place." Eloise swallowed hard, glancing over her shoulder at Serafina's smug expression. "Well, she's succeeding." In that second, Eloise realized the event was no charity gala for the Children's Art Academy. It was a stage for Serafina to orchestrate a public spectacle. Leave a wow if you saw that coming. Also, let us know if you think Lucretia has truly turned over a new leaf or if she's still a threat. Eloise braced herself, determined not to let Serafina or the paparazzi glean any sensational drama. She exhaled slowly. "Come with me," she said, guiding Lucretia toward an empty corridor outside the main ballroom. The corridor, lit by antique sconces, was hushed compared to the chatter of the gala. Eloise turned to face Lucretia, arms folded defensively. "Why did you agree to work for Serafina? You must have known it would lead to this." Lucretia's cheeks flushed. "I needed the contract. Financially, it's a lifeline. I was naive to think Serafina's motivations were purely professional. Now I see she's using me to provoke you and Damien." Her eyes flickered with regret. "I just want to do my job and move on. I have no intention of reopening old wounds, especially with your baby on the way." Eloise assessed her, trying to reconcile the woman who had intruded on her marriage with the apparent sincerity of this explanation. Yet the sting of betrayal was too fresh. "I can't just forgive and forget," she murmured. "But I do believe you aren't here to do more damage. Maybe you are a pawn in Serafina's hands." Soft footsteps echoed through the corridor, and they both turned to see Damien approaching, concern etched across his face. Without a word, he positioned himself beside Eloise, the subtle gesture proclaiming his alliance. Lucretia nodded awkwardly in greeting. "I should go," she said. "I didn't come here to worsen anything." With that, she slipped past them, her heels clicking on the polished floor as she returned to the main event. Eloise inhaled, exhaled, then looked at Damien. "We've got to be careful," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. He nodded, resting a hand gently on her arm. "We will be." Despite the swirl of half-hidden eyes, shifting allegiances, and headlines waiting to be born, they stood together in that corridor, two wounded souls learning how to stand united again. But for how long? Neither could say. As they re-entered the gala, the tension in the air was palpable. Serafina watched from across the room, a glint of satisfaction in her eyes as though she had only just begun to unravel their precarious path to reconciliation. If you're glued to this unfolding spectacle, drop a yes in the comments. And don't forget to mention if you think Eloise should steer clear of these social gatherings. As the weeks pressed on, Eloise's due date loomed closer. The baby, a fierce presence in her womb, seemed to sense her mother's anxiety, moving and kicking more frequently. Dr. Queller advised them to reduce stress, but that was easier said than done in a world where high society pitfalls lurked around every corner. Damien and Eloise contemplated withdrawing altogether, selling the estate and finding a quieter life elsewhere. But they also recognized that running away might simply invite new gossip. Despite the obstacles, they experienced moments of genuine intimacy. Damien would find Eloise in the garden, lightly pruning roses, and quietly slip beside her to help. She, in turn, allowed him to read baby books aloud to her at night, his voice soothing the ache of her uncertainty. Neither pretended that trust was fully repaired, but shared vulnerability had become a fragile bridge they were building, plank by plank. One Saturday morning, a courier arrived with an envelope marked "Confidential." Inside, they found legal paperwork from Serafina Lockwood's counsel, with a bizarre request for permission to publish details about Damien's investment successes. But hidden among the lines was a vague mention of how those deals intersected with Lucretia Wolford's consulting. It was an odd contract that seemed designed to exploit Damien's personal narrative for Serafina's commercial gain, further blending rumor and commerce into one messy proposition. The letter jolted them awake. Damien slammed it onto the dining table, fury in his eyes. "She's brazenly threatening to link my name to scandal if I don't comply," he seethed. Eloise steadied him with a hand on his arm. "We knew she might attempt something like this. Let's show it to Aurelia and see how we can respond legally." By now, Eloise had faced so many betrayals, illusions, and tactical maneuvers that her exhaustion rivaled her anger. Yet a tiny spark inside her refused to yield. This was her life, her marriage, her future child. She wouldn't let Serafina or any other opportunist reduce her family to a footnote in their social games. Little did she know that the final twist was about to arrive, one that would test every lesson she and Damien had learned about trust and redemption. It's the calm before the storm. Comment ready if you're bracing for what's next, and feel free to tag a friend who loves dramatic twists. Late one night, as a soft rain misted the windows, Eloise stirred from bed with a sharp pang in her lower abdomen. At first, she thought it was another false contraction. Those had become common in her final weeks. But within minutes, the pain escalated. Her heart pounded as she placed a hand on her belly. She could sense the difference. This was no ordinary twinge. Panic flared in her mind. What if the baby was coming too soon, just as stress had overshadowed their final preparations? She tried calling for Damien, but another wave of pain hit, stealing her breath. Gathering every ounce of composure, she managed to reach her phone on the nightstand and dial his number. In less than a minute, he burst into the bedroom, eyes wild with alarm. He helped her to the car, moving swiftly but carefully, ignoring his own trembling. As they sped toward the hospital, Eloise clutched his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared," she whispered, 1,000 worries converging at once. The baby's safety, her own health, the fragile nature of their marriage. Damien pressed her hand to his lips, voice shaking. "I'm here. I promise I'm here." Under the fluorescent glare of the hospital's maternity wing, doctors confirmed she was indeed in labor, earlier than expected. Concerned by her slightly elevated blood pressure and the baby's position, they prepared for potential complications. Eloise's world narrowed to the stark white corridor, the beep of monitors, and the comforting grip of Damien's hand. Hours stretched in a blur of pain, pushing, and frantic prayers. Then near dawn, a trembling cry shattered the tense silence. A baby girl arrived, small yet full of indomitable life. The medical staff whisked her away briefly to ensure her lungs were clear. Eloise collapsed against the hospital bed, relief mixing with exhaustion so complete it felt like she'd run a marathon. Damien stood by, tears streaming down his cheeks, transfixed by the sight of his daughter, the living symbol of everything he'd almost thrown away. When they finally placed the baby in Eloise's arms, she gazed at her tiny features, feeling both terror and elation. Damien cradled them both, tears of gratitude painting his face. At that moment, betrayal, heartbreak, and regrets receded. All that mattered was that this fragile new life had arrived safely, forging an unbreakable bond that neither rumor nor scandal could destroy. Comment miracle if you believe in fresh starts. And if you've stayed till now, thank you. Your engagement keeps this story alive. Dappled morning light shone through the hospital blinds as the new parents reveled in the sheer wonder of their newborn daughter. When a nurse guided Damien to the neonatal checkup area, Eloise closed her eyes in a rare moment of solitude. Memory fragments flashed. The midnight phone call that ripped her world apart, the confessions in therapy, Lucretia's admission of guilt, Serafina's manipulations. It felt like a lifetime compressed into a few tumultuous months. Now life had offered something pure and precious, a fresh soul who knew nothing of scandal or mistrust. Across town, Serafina Lockwood surely bristled at the lack of sensational updates. Word about Eloise's early labor would surface soon enough, but overshadowing the news of a healthy baby with rumors of betrayal might prove difficult. Even Lucretia, who had once been the catalyst of heartbreak, seemed distant from their lives. Aurelia Dimitrov, still protective of her friend, had staved off the worst of the legal threats, ensuring Eloise's privacy during the final days of her pregnancy. As the hours passed, Damien returned to Eloise's side. He gently placed their swaddled daughter in her arms, and for a moment, father and mother locked eyes. Their conversation didn't need words. Yes, the road here had been scarred by betrayal, but if redemption existed, it was in the tiny hand that reflexively clasped Eloise's finger. The world outside might still be rife with cynicism and prying eyes, but within these hospital walls they had a second chance. That evening, Eloise sat up in bed nursing her daughter, while Damien hovered protectively. Finally, she broke the stillness. "We'll name her Aurora," she said, "for the dawn that follows even the darkest night." Damien nodded, tears in his eyes. "Aurora it is." No grand apology or elaborate vow could instantly mend every wound, but the flame of forgiveness flickered, fed by hope. Over time, they would continue therapy, unravel the tangles of distrust, and face whichever storms arrived. Perhaps they'd cut ties with the grand estate and the venomous high society circles. Perhaps they'd fight to stay and assert their resilience. Whatever path they chose, one thing felt certain. With Aurora's arrival, they had discovered a guiding light. Neither midnight texts nor malicious rumors could extinguish the unbreakable force of new life and the relentless possibility of a love reborn. Thank you for witnessing this journey. Comment Aurora if you believe in new beginnings. Your thoughts and feedback shape our storytelling. Let us know what resonated with you the most.